Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this The Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And today we are going through what exactly is in store for us for the future, and why frankly people only really care about reform, have to say, and don't really care about the ankle biters. But we'll not get into that too much because, as I say, nobody really cares. They're just lolcows at this point. Speaking of, we will open up with the first ankle biter, which is the Tory party. More than 3 months ago, Reform promised they would publish a plan on immigration, but they still don't have one. That's probably because they took 10 councils off you, you know, where priorities change and all that. And ultimately, you end up chasing headlines with 10 of your councils rather than chasing headlines with your deportation plan. Politics is all about timing, and, well, when you end up doing 5 times better than you expected, yeah, your priorities tend to change. I've told people about that for months. Do people who are anti-reform listen? Of course they don't. But that doesn't matter. I remain one of the most smug people on YouTube, and there has been very little to change my mind on that recently. Nigel Farage is on record of saying deporting all illegal immigrants is impossible. Our policy on illegal immigration is clear: deport them. Nigel Farage has been saying deport them all for over a year, so I don't know what you're talking about. Nigel Farage was saying we should deport all illegals and criminals while you were still in power, by the way. So, once again, this is just pathetic ankle biting from a party that was in power for 14 years, by the way, the most successful party ever, and now it's dying a death. And most people are happy about that. And obviously they have a quick plan themselves, which is don't apply the Human Rights Act for immigration-related matters. Why not just get rid of it? Double the residency requirement for indefinite leave to remain. Why not just get rid of it? New powers to revoke indefinite leave to remain. Why not just get rid of it? A legally binding annual cap on migration. You've promised that before. Tightening visa rules. You've promised that before. Visa sanctions for uncooperative countries. You have promised that before. Why would anyone take you seriously or care what you have to say? There's only 2 types of people that do care. One are the eternal Tories that simply cannot see themselves as supporting any party other than the Tory party. That is a dying breed, thank God. And the cynical types that think that they can make their way through selection and effectively commit entryism into the party. That has been tried many, many times in the past, and it never works. Why would it work this time? Oh, they're desperate enough to do it. No, the Tory party are currently in a bit of a civil war as to, do we just turn ourselves into a Reform light, or do we turn ourselves into Lib Dems but with more power? And given that pretty much after Liz Truss and Robert Jenrick lost, everyone who wanted them to be Reform light have basically left the party, either to not join another one because they hate Farage too much, or have actually joined Reform because they're okay with Farage. It's pretty obvious to me which side is going to win, and anyone who is signalling their way to the right is effectively quite worried about their seat, which is in an area that is going to be voting Reform instead. The Tory party for the past 30 years has basically been built on nothing but cynicism. There's no reason to think that that has changed now, especially because the right wing of the party is quite clearly moving over to Reform. Even Rees-Mogg is giving Farage an awful lot of credit. Anyway, the reason I brought all this up is because on the same day as this tweet, we got this from the Times. Nigel Farage: this is a massive crisis. We need mass deportations.
He said it! He said it!
Yes, I suppose before we massively get into the details of what has been said by Farage and what the plan from Reform is, I want to address something quite large, something a bit of an elephant in the room, something that is brought up almost every time I see this topic brought up anywhere on Twitter, YouTube, or wherever, and that is what influenced this. Because there will obviously be a lot of people saying, oh, it's the online right, it's Rupert Lowe, oh, you know, it's the public's to the right of Farage, blah-de-blah-de-blah. This plan for the deportations of illegals, of foreign criminals, and to, of course, massively drop legal migration will have been in the works pretty much since the election last year, the general election. They will have been working on policy, they will have been talking to experts, they will have been talking with think tanks. They'll of course also have campaign strategists for advice on all this. When it comes to agitators on Twitter, who aren't particularly famous outside of that platform, quite frankly, yeah, I'm going to be honest with you. If Elon Musk offering them $100 million in a donation in return for influence over policy, which Farage himself has said, can't quite do that, Do you really think a few people who chat a load of waffle on Twitter mainly are going to be influencing reform? Let's be real, and let's just go into specifics. Very quickly, of course. Alistair Harrison wrote for Rupert Lowe on his Twitter account saying, a mass deportation policy will now become the baseline manifesto promise of all major political parties at the next election. That's probably true. The argument is how far it goes. 6 months ago, it was a lonely argument to make in Parliament. My passionate support for the policy played a large part in my ejection from reform. That's not true. Why would they kick you out for working on policy and advocating policy that was already being worked on? You absolute buffoon. We've pretty much got to the point where everyone accepts that the reason you were kicked out is because you were unworkable. Hell, even according to Gawain Taylor on his interviews, Rupert Lowe basically demanded that reform come to him rather than he go to head office. I think it's even been claimed that he didn't even go to head office once. Simple matter of fact, Rupert Lowe was not a team player and seems to be more hated within Reform at the HQ than Zia Yusuf apparently was. Anyway, it's quite clear that he's trying to take credit for this, and once again, I have to say, no, you can't take any credit for this. This was already being worked on. The only actual difference that we have at the moment, and we'll get into this when we look into the policy, is that Reform haven't actually moved right on anything other than, you could argue, rhetoric, which is saying the magic words, which I care so little about it's barely worth going into. Hence, I'm only really going into it to say to Rupert Lowe and all the people around him, no, you do not have this influence. You are, as I have gone through before, literally just being used to save a few Tory seats. That's all you're good for, and that is not a good thing. Case in point, Alistair, Rupert Lowe's social media guy, decided to throw out a tweet not long after Reform announced their mass deportation plans. In fact, it was a while after, it was yesterday. Thanking all the MPs that have signed his mass deportation motion in Parliament. And it's mostly a bunch of Tories. Again, the main reason for this is quite cynical. If the Tories actually wanted this, they would have pushed this. It's all to try and save their seats and give them some credence to say, look at me, I want mass deportations too. Basically, I'm saying Rupert Lowe's a bit of a useful idiot, and he has been for some months now. And it certainly seems to be a, aspect that has been noticed by more than just myself now, which I have to say is an improvement, but it's not been noticed by everyone. Basil the Great, which seems to be a completely universally hated account, at least in my circles, who is little more than a Rupert Lowe sycophant. Oh, but Haryan, you're a Farage sycophant. Yeah, well, at least Farage is winning. Anyway, Basil the Great posted, Rupert Lowe changes Nigel Farage's mind on mass deportations, ? Just months ago, Nigel told Rupert to remove mass deportations from his speech, calling it a very grave, dark and dangerous use of language. That was the claim by Rupert Lowe. The words from Nigel Farage's mouth were specifically about saying, just send them to Ascension Island and let the midgies deal with them. In other words, just let them die, which is probably a little harsh. The only time you can really see Nigel Farage saying, no, I won't do mass deportations, is in the Steve Edgerton interview, which I've covered so many times it's getting boring now. The problem was, you use your shutting out rhetoric too early, you end up getting associated with people you don't particularly want to be associated with. What's the way to do it? Time it much better with public mood. What's a good way to do that? Start winning against the hotels in, say, Epping, and then when asked what do you do with these people, you say, well, deport them all then. The point of this video is to let you know that an awful lot of politics is about timing, and a lot of people really want to blow their entire load early to try and, I guess, drop kick the Overton window to the right. I'm afraid that's not quite how politics or the public mood works. You can't just will rhetoric into the public sphere. Something quite large has to happen for people to be, more open to something like that. And with all the problems we're seeing with illegal immigrants in hotels and HMOs, now's the time. You may have noticed it early, but you've got to remember that the public are generally about 5 years behind us. And at the end of the day, Reform are mostly dealing with the general public. And again, I'll make it very clear once again, the only real difference between Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe is that Rupert Lowe has less of a filter, effectively. They have pretty much the exact same politics, it's just Rupert Lowe, I suppose, not having the same amount of campaigning experience of Nigel Farage in winning major elections, doesn't quite grasp that to the same. Nigel Farage, once again, has always been to the right of the Overton window, and at most will take baby steps out of it. The reason he does this is because he can take some flack for that, but ultimately you're only going to make serious changes in politics by going that route, rather than, as I say, moving far to the outside of it and trying to drag everyone along with you. People like that will always exist and will always claim that they were victorious, but all I have to point to is momentum in Labour to show you that that's just complete and utter nonsense. Anyway, I think I've made my point, so I will just name call a few other people that are in the same boat as Basil here. One is obviously Brugaloo, who's not the same as Master Brew from a few years ago. He's a cheap knockoff, and basically all his work seems to be is associate some of the Tories with Rupert Lowe and try and revive their image. That's basically it. A completely useless person, and riding the wave of someone who is frankly much more talented than them. A person that you should ignore, absolutely. We then get into people who have shown their faces, thankfully. Connor Tomlinson obviously taking the credit for moving reform to the right, despite the fact you will never give them credit for actually driving the conversation on immigration, net zero, cost of living, all that, by actually being 30-odd% in the polls, 10 to 15 points ahead of Labour, of course, as well. And effectively will say this was because I was at their conference saying these things a year ago. That is, of course, if we ignore people like Richard Tice effectively telling Connor to go away when he had absolutely ridiculous things to say about them, which I've covered in the past. This is all about self-promotion. I understand the incentives, but as I say, I'm going nuclear on these people because ultimately, if they do end up in positions where they are actually influencing, it's going to destroy the right. These people are effectively the momentum of the right, and I don't want them anywhere near influence, because frankly, they have a bit of a script of stupid points that they want to make constantly, can't think dynamically, and because of that, can't be pragmatic, and ultimately, politics is about being pragmatic. It's very boring, it's very tedious, you constantly have to have a back and forth with the public trying to drag them toward your point of view. It takes time, it's taken Farage 30 years to get to this point, you can't do it overnight, and you especially can't do it as a Zoomer that effectively tries to blame everything on the boomers. That is probably the worst thing you can do. Anyway, the final Zoomer waffle I'm going through is Harrison Pitt, who's managed to get onto the advisory board for Restore Britain, probably because he's friends with Charlie Downs, trying to once again claim that the very online right has no influence. How can you say that? Look at this policy, which we're going to go through. Given that the unimaginative name-calling no longer works, it absolutely does, I'll wager that our understanding of what is possible will only expand over the next few years. I'm sorry, but again, it just has to be pointed out. Reform have been working on this policy probably since they finished campaigning for the general election. This is obviously the main reason for reform existing, is immigration, and they've obviously expanded what else they want to look into, and we've been drip-fed some of the other policy, the Britannia card, for example, even crypto when that was slightly on topic, and these are things that they just throw out when there's slow news days, effectively. Now that immigration is at the forefront of everyone's mind with all these protests going on, yeah, they're riding that wave. It's good timing, it's good politics, it's what you do to drive the conversation. Saying the same thing about it day in, day out for years, complaining that Reform don't shut out about it 24/7, while they've been working on it, by the way, just makes you look a bit mad. And your average Reform activist, councillor, whatever, people I've been talking to an awful lot about this, understand this exactly. They understand politics much better than these people who, frankly, have been thrown into the media world without really spending a day in the real world itself. What these people are effectively is the right-wing version of the people who work for Politics Joe. They are people who have basically only been journalists or maybe worked for a think tank beforehand. Not people who, frankly like me, have been working in the private sector for 10 years or so. Who understand business, who understand things happen actually quite slowly. And, despite how smug I am at the moment, do not overinflate their own opinions. Your main opposition to Reform and the way they were working was that they were not using the same rhetoric as you. That was pretty much your only complaint. They haven't really moved, as we will go through, their own policy. They've given us more detail, but overall, the policy is largely the same as it was in the contract. All they've done now is use your magic words, and now you're trying to claim influence. I literally cannot tell you how stupid that claim is. I cannot tell you how much I loathe your inflated egos, and I don't think I can put into words just how nuclear I want to go on all of you. As far as I'm concerned, you are worse than the left at the moment, because ultimately all you are going to end up doing if you do can signal Reform 24/7 and do get your way, is you're going to get the Tories in again. Why would you trust them? Oh, well, they'll have Lowe in this time. Great. What's he managed to do in Reform? Oh, just annoy everyone and get kicked out. Why wouldn't the same thing happen in the Tories? Come on. Because even if the narrative has legs that Farage doesn't want anyone else to take the spotlight, Do you think there are not people at the top of the Tory party who think the exact same way, who don't want Lowe taking the spotlight? Do you really think they're the type of people to put country before party or their own political ambitions? No, obviously not. Lowe has degraded himself to a useless idiot and a complete moronic reply guy on Twitter, who at the very least with Restore Britain, the useful thing they're doing is being an FOI machine. They throw out the odd stupid tweet such as, oh, putting up some lights costs £2. But when it comes to being an FOI machine, I don't really have much of a problem with that. If you want to spend £25 for that, be my guest. But really, I think that £25 would be much more useful and is actually going to end up in much more direct results going to reform. But hell, keep ankle snapping all you want. You're going to be laughed at by pretty much everyone, and I have no doubt in my mind that Reform HQ, whenever they see tweets like this, they share it and laugh over a pint. That's the reality of the situation. Deal with it however you see fit. Anyway, I think it's time to get back to Farage and what he had to say. So, it has been a total catastrophic disaster, he says, speaking to his constituency office in Clacton-on-Sea. I tried to have a couple of weeks off. I was called away 4 times. I was having a week on the coast in Kent. I was having a week in Cornwall. Cornwall was important to me because all 4 of my adult children and grandchildren were there. There was a massive fire in Clacton, so I had to come back for that. BTFO people who say he's never in Clacton. And then there was 2 big other donor visits and going to see JD Vance, the US Vice President, which wasn't a bad thing, but I'm busy as hell. Yeah, this is the life of, well, let alone an MP, certainly the life of a leader of a political party who looks like they are going to be the next Prime Minister. There is no doubt about that. The Reform UK leader believes this is his do-or-die moment, his one shot at number 10, and Britain, he says, is going downhill very, very quickly, and there needs to be a massive turnaround, and he argues as he is the man to do it. And, well, yeah, I would agree. That is why I am such a simp for reform. And while that has quite clearly annoyed some people, I'm afraid to say that the political reality of the situation is that, yes, it is quite literally back Farage or be disappointed. Those are literally the only 2 options. And, you know, Farage might be disappointing, sure. The reality of the situation, though, is that when you go into the risk assessment, it's, well, he's most likely to win, and he's also least likely to disappoint me, quite frankly. So take from that what you will. So next week, Farage will make his biggest move yet. On Tuesday, he will publish his proposal for the mass deportation of hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants. To describe the plans as aggressive is an understatement. Yes, this is what I have been saying for quite some time. Why, for God's sake, why would you be to the right, or just to the right, say, of the Overton window for over a year, only to disappoint everyone? When you only focus on rhetoric, you end up looking a bit of a fool, because I've actually been going through what not only just Nigel Farage, but Zia Youssef, Richard Tice, Lee Anderson have actually been saying about immigration and what their policy will probably be, and there has never been a doubt in my mind that it will be too far for, say, the Times. It will be rather aggressive, and I only doubled down on this after they started going on about crime, and as soon as they started saying they would send people to jail in El Salvador, that's when I thought, well, their immigration policy's only got to be more aggressive than that. Of course it is. All you need is a bit of patience, and a lot of people have made it quite clear they have no patience whatsoever, and that is a very silly situation to be in. They include the arrest of asylum seekers on arrival, automatic detention and forced deportation with no right of appeal to countries such as Afghanistan and Eritrea, 2 places with not the greatest human rights record, especially with Afghanistan now being taken over by the Taliban. And one thing I keep saying from, well, Times journalists and other left-wing or centre-left commentators is, oh my god, they're actually going to talk to the Taliban, can you believe it? Germany's literally already doing that, so yeah, I kind of expect Farage to. There are plans for deals with third countries such as Rwanda, a fallback option of sending people to British overseas territories such as Ascension Island, and new criminal offences for people who return to the UK or destroy their identity documents. Good, these are all big problems that I and many others have been complaining about for some time. This seems somewhat comprehensive. I cannot wait to see the detail. And some of you might be saying, oh, but Rupert Lowe mentioned Ascension Island. Yeah, the problem with what Rupert Lowe said is that he basically said leave them there to die. The point of this is that is the alternative detention centre, which is fine because you basically send them there to process them and then deport them elsewhere, which is still a pretty effective deterrent. It worked for Australia anyway. The NHS, HMRC and the DVLA will be required to share data automatically so illegal immigrants can be tracked down and arrested. Oh my god. Every element of the plan is contentious, and it is likely to encounter huge practical, political and legal obstacles. Oh, I think they'll be ready for that. Farage appears to embrace the controversy. The aim of this legislation is mass deportations.
There it is! There it is!
We have a massive crisis in Britain. It is not only posing a national security threat, but it's leading to public anger that, frankly, is not very far away from disorder. There is only one way to stop people coming into Britain, and that is to detain them and deport them. Yes, excellent. Again, my position on mass deportations in terms of rhetoric, it seems to have been unclear for some people. I've never actually had an issue with the word beyond it's really stupid to just demand politicians say this or you don't take them seriously. And on top of that, it's pretty obvious that it can effectively link you up with people such as the Homeland Party, who effectively mean it's to deport all black and brown people. However, Farage is making it once again incredibly clear that it is just for illegal migrants, which, yes, is actually what everyone wants. And the thing is, people will say, oh, we've got evidence now that mass deportations are the popular opinion. The thing is that in no poll ever has the word mass deportation actually appeared. I've been through them. I've done videos on them. What it basically says is, do you agree with reform policy of deport all illegals? And it's like 99% yes. It is understandable that this is a very popular opinion, and now, because effectively reform is the Overton window at this point, mass deportations is pretty much only going to mean that. And because of that, what I predict all of these dork right people are going to do now is effectively say, well, you can't take him seriously until he starts saying remigration. I imagine you will see a pivot to there. Because ultimately, these people are never happy and do not want Farage to succeed. For the simple fact of that if Farage does succeed, these people are basically useless and have nothing to add. I'd argue that's the case now, but, well, they don't necessarily think that. Farage's plan begins with leaving the ECHR and scrapping the Human Rights Act. That's flanking the Tories to the right, isn't it? This, he says, is relatively straightforward. It's not a very difficult thing to do, he says. There isn't any renegotiation agreement that needs to be done or anything like that. This can be done reasonably quickly. Well, I hope that is true. The main problem I'm seeing with the ECHR is the Good Friday Agreement, but I don't see why that can't be effectively written up to be the same thing anyway. I don't know why it requires the ECHR to necessarily run when it can probably be rewritten to effectively do the same thing. The second part of Farage's plan is to introduce a British Bill of Rights. Gone will be any mention of human rights from the statute books. Excellent. That is excellent. Human rights are pretty much exclusively applied to be universal and do not particularly differentiate between British citizens and foreign nationals, making it quite clear that there is now a definitive difference between being a British citizen and being a foreign national is incredible. That is exactly what I want to see. Thank you very much. In its place will be terms such as liberty and freedom of expression. The freedom is to do everything unless there's a law that says you can't, he says. The opposite of that is the concept of human rights, which are state-given. Effectively negative versus positive rights. So this British Bill of Rights will very much be in the spirit, it sounds, of the classical liberal positions of John Locke, which, believe it or not, was the point of the original Bill of Rights back in the late 1600s, though that was pretty much exclusively given to Protestants rather than British citizens. But you know what? I'm kind of fine with that, given I'm not Protestant. Britain would also derogate from the Refugee Convention, the UN Convention Against Torture, oh my god, and the Council of Europe's Anti-Trafficking Convention. Farage argues that doing so is necessary because the UK is facing a state of emergency, which I think an awful lot of people are agreeing with. Hell, if you would ask for an emergency that would give you any excuse to rid ourselves of these Blairite globalist shackles, I think that this is the perfect one. Again, for an entire year I have heard that Farage is just Tories 2.0, Farage is left-wing, Farage isn't serious, blah blah blah. I'm not being funny. You don't say that we are going to leave the UN Convention Against Torture and the Anti-Trafficking Convention unless you are very right-wing and very nationalistic. Let's be real here. And then the next step is even more controversial. For months, Reform has been working on the illegal migration or mass deportation bill, which will make it illegal for people to come to the UK illegally. They will be detained on surplus RAF bases and then deported. Farage says that coming to the UK in small boats, people would face immediate arrest. As part of the plan, which is called Operation Restoring Justice, Farage's government would build detention centres capable of detaining 24,000 people. Thank you very much, and once the illegal migration problem's done, hopefully they can throw some shoplifters in there too. His vision is for prefab buildings with canteens and medical facilities on site. People would not be allowed to leave, and Farage believes they can be deported within 30 days, hopefully quicker. You know, if they're on old RAF bases, hopefully there'll be runways. They have no right to claim asylum, he says. They would be arrested and detained, they'd be put into disused military bases, and we would potentially need some prefab buildings put up, something like that. Don't tell me we can't put together facilities for people to stay, because we can. They would need to be treated with a degree of civility, of course. They're going to be fed and watered and looked after, given medical care if they need it too. Yeah, fine. I mean, frankly, they are just following incentives of effectively old parties' failures. That's what's happened here. I don't particularly want to treat them too incivilly because of, frankly, mistakes that our own government has been making in the past, but I do want them to stop, and once they know that, well, effectively they are going to be deported within 30 days of arriving, with any luck, then they'll stop coming over, and effectively we can drop the number of these detention centres once the problem starts fixing itself. He contrasts this plan with the view of the present situation. You have these young men from different cultures, Afghans being perhaps the worst example, who are literally free at licence to go out, work in the criminal economy, and commit crimes, he says. And I think it's an area of sexual crime that perhaps is the only one that has upset the public the most. They should not be free to walk our streets, period. Completely agree. Guess why they can? Human Rights Act, ECHR. For illegal immigrants, you are literally not allowed to keep them in prison-like centres. You're not allowed to treat them as prisoners. They have to be let out and free to associate. That is obviously ridiculous. Thank God Reform are going to win and get us out of that nonsense. The legislative package would include powers giving the government the right to detain people without any recourse to bail. The Home Secretary would be put under a statutory duty to remove people from the UK. Where would they be sent? This is perhaps the most contentious part of Farage's plan. He wants to sign deals with countries such as Afghanistan and Eritrea, despotic regimes with dire human rights records. We have enormous muscles on these things, he says. We can be nice to people, we can be nice to other countries, or we can be very tough to other countries. But all the diplomatic levers that we have, if we have to use them on visas, on trade, sanctions, I mean, Trump has proven this point quite comprehensively, that yeah, you can kind of bully other countries into doing what you want. Trump isn't doing very well with that on, say, Canada, but he has done quite well with it on South America. And then the obvious question of, oh, what about if people are killed or tortured when you send them back? Well, Farage responds, I'm really sorry, but we can't be responsible for everything that happens in the whole of the world, he says. What's our priority? Is it the safety and security of this country and the people, or are we worrying about everyone else and foreign courts? That's effectively what it's come down to. Whose side are you on? British people, everybody else. And for years it feels like it's been everybody else. This type of rhetoric, by the way, is why Reform are on 30% plus in the polls, and why, to be honest, after Tuesday, I'd be shocked if it doesn't go up even higher. So how would he respond as a Prime Minister if people were tortured because of his deportation policy? There is no particular reason why they should be tortured because they have gone back, he said, but look, I can't be responsible for despotic regimes all over the world, but I can be responsible for the safety of women and girls on our streets, which again is the common thread with this whole Britain is lawless campaign that Reform are on right now, and it seems to be working. Farage will also send people to third countries. He is open to reviving the Conservative Party's Rwanda plan, which he says would work under his overhaul of the asylum system. Albania is another potential destination, though they haven't worked out with Labour, of course. And there is another plank to the plan, a fallback of sending people to British overseas territories, which is there as a backstop. The message that if you come, you won't stay is so important. Now, ideally, they'll be going back to Iraq, to Iran, wherever, Eritrea, Afghanistan, but if we have some problematic ones, then that's the backstop. You will not be staying in this country if you pay a trafficker to cross the English Channel. Very good. Farage suggests asylum seekers could be sent to Ascension Island, 4,000 miles away in the South Atlantic. The island is notoriously difficult to get to, and landing is said to be a treacherous experience. It's a long way away and it would be expensive. It can manage military aircraft, but again, it's symbolism. But even if it proves to be viable, what if the overseas territories don't want to accommodate thousands of asylum seekers? Of course they won't want them, Farage says, but that's just part of the deal. And hopefully it's just a fallback plan that they won't need anyway. And to be honest, they could have been sent to the Chagos Islands if we didn't just give them to Mauritius by the stupid Labour government. Anyway, Farage envisages that 5 deportation flights would be chartered every day and an RAF Voyager would be on reserve if needed. The government, he says, would take a carrot and stick approach with a 6-month voluntary return scheme. People will be able to deport themselves using an app and be given $2,500 to leave the country, and their flights would be paid for. I suppose that's a good way. At first, either you go back with some money or we are coming to get you. That well, that could cost a lot, and that was definitely something 5-6 years ago I was saying I never particularly want to pay for. At this point, yeah, it's just too much of a saving to not do. The carrot is indeed very, very clear. If you're here illegally, we're coming for you. We will remove you, but what we can do is help you get back to where you came from, put £2,500 in your pocket, not charge you an airfare to go, and I think quite a few might take that option, and it'd be a hell of a lot more peaceful. Farage claims the policy would cost $10 billion over 5 years, but can those figures be right? Is there not a risk that building additional migration detention centres alone could swallow up a bulk of that money, never mind deals with other countries? The cost of a charter flight and building accommodation in overseas territories is also a cost to think about. Reform insists that the plan is fully costed. It says the policy will save $7 billion over 5 years compared with the existing cost of the asylum system, which obviously if this goes on then for 10 years and a second parliament, you end up saving £4 billion overall. He suggests the plan will stop the boats in as little as 2 weeks, highlighting the impact of a hardline policy introduced by the former Prime Minister Tony Abbott in Australia. He towed them back to Indonesia, Farage said. If people coming know they'll be detained, they know they will then be deported, and they will stop coming very, very quickly. And obviously they go into the example of Donald Trump doing this with the Mexican border, and, well, the number of people coming over has dropped quite a bit. A lot of this is difficult to tell because you don't know what the effect of doing it in the first place is going to be. Wow, Farage is thinking of second, third, fourth order consequences. Mad, I've never seen that from a politician. The Tories thought Rwanda would be dramatic as a deterrent, and it would have been if they'd been allowed to do it under the ECHR and British judges, so estimating some of this is difficult, isn't it? We've got guesstimates of what it would cost for each individual to be rounded up and deported, which is why the voluntary option would be a lot cheaper for everyone. I do agree. Farage adds that the illegal migrant crisis is costing $7 billion a year. I think it's actually more than that. But the truth is that it doesn't even get close to what it is really costing us and what it's costing the NHS. And the fact is that they have to be provided free healthcare, and the fact that the NHS dentists have been on hand, the police time for those that commit wrongs as well. You know, we're talking here about massive financial problem, far bigger than we're saying in this document, far bigger than anyone's saying. And our hope is that this would actually suit the NHS to cooperate with us on this. Yeah, I do remember, especially with the Altrincham story, that, well, the men in the hotel were getting private dental care at the cost of, obviously, the council, and obviously, well, had on-call NHS doctors as well, but they might have been private as well, actually, I can't remember. Point being, they are being treated a hell of a lot better than your average British person, which is obviously going to cause a large amount of resentment. Reform will also mount a crackdown on the black economy. Oh my god, this has got everything. This is everything I've asked for. It says it will require the NHS and other public bodies to provide information so illegal immigrants can be tracked down and detained. They're even managing to track down the illegals without having to resort to digital IDs. Thank God for that. Because I remember when Cero Poaching basically said, yeah, I don't really get why everyone cares about digital IDs, and then all of a sudden that translated to, oh, Reform are pro-digital ID. No, they're not. That's never been the case. You're just trying to find any excuse you can to badmouth Farage and Reform, because ultimately, if they are the answer to most of our questions, what good are you? You literally rely on the state to be a complete failure to keep your grift going. The reason for that being that you have absolutely no talent other than complaining about the state that Britain is in. Fortunately, I'm actually a somewhat interesting person, so I have other things to talk about, so If Farage and Reform do actually solve most of our problems and I have nothing left to complain about, I can literally talk about plenty of other things, such as history, I don't know, a bit of philosophy, economics as well if you really want to go into that, science, geology if that interests people. There's so much I could do, but seriously, there are so many people whose only relevance is the fact that they can complain on Twitter, on websites, on podcasts. It's ridiculous. We've made an entire economy on the right wing that effectively is the same economy as the left in the 2010s, which is that we need to say we're the biggest victims ever to get attention. It's pathetic. The timing of Farage's announcement is deliberate. Epping just won. Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, is expected to set out her plans to leave the ECHR at the Tory conference, and Farage is dismissive. Who? No one knows who she is. That's not even that untrue either. That's obviously hyperbolic, but the spirit of the thing's pretty much true. Nobody really cares about Kemi Badenoch or what she has to say. No one. I mean, where's the credibility? Do you think they'll go as far as these? If it'll be the usual Tory fudge. They're a broad church with absolutely no religion. Oof. The government's asylum policy in the meantime is in turmoil. Last week a judge granted an injunction that would lead to the closure of a hotel in Epping, housing asylum seekers. That has been the site of repeated protests. Dozens of protests are expected outside asylum hotels across the country this weekend, as other local authorities consider applying for similar injunctions. Farage warns that there will be social unrest unless they close. I know the argument is that they'll move them into HMOs or they'll do whatever they'll do, but I do think the migrant hotels are a symbol of all that is wrong, all that is unfair, and increasingly, it's a big security risk. With that, Farage is off to visit a craft ale and beer festival nearby where he lives up to his cigarette-smoking, beer-drinking caricature. What a lad. There are some mornings I wake up and think I must be completely off my head, but that never lasts more than an hour or two because the buzz and excitement of building something, of moving forwards. So no, I mean, basically, I'm still pretty energised. Excellent. I hope you can keep that up for 4 more years, and then 5 years after you get into number 10. The outlining of these plans, which we will get more detail of on Tuesday, to me, it's an awful lot of what I asked for. Is it entirely what I asked for? I don't know. I can't remember everything I asked for. To be honest with you, I think even the mention of Ascension Island is slightly to the right of what I was expecting. Even without the Ascension Island mention, I would be very happy. Anyway, there are of course other articles on these deportation plans that had, well, quite typical criticisms you would expect from mainstream papers. For example, The Times yesterday said Nigel Farage calls for 2-tier rights to prioritise British citizens. Reform UK said it would scrap the Human Rights Act and replace it with legislation that applies only to UK citizens and legal migrants, the party says. Which is absolutely hilarious to hear, yes. Technically, by that point of view, you can say, oh, there's 2 tiers of justice when it comes to criminals and non-criminals. Yeah, you're right. That's kind of the point. But obviously the title is trying to undermine the Reform Party because of their 2-tier quips, which is all about, by the way, British citizens being second-class citizens to literal criminals. And this article is a bit of a repeat of what Farage has already said that we have gone through, but anyway, British citizens will be given priority over foreigners under Farage's plan to scrap the Human Rights Act, one of Reform UK's most senior figures has said. On Tuesday, obviously, the details of the deportation plan will be revealed, and under the plans, the UK would formally withdraw from the ECHR and other international agreements. The Human Rights Act, which enshrines the Convention into British law, would be replaced by the British Bill of Rights, which would only apply to British citizens and those who have the legal right to live in the UK, which obviously is a hell of a lot better than we have now. The legislation would not include any reference to human rights, but instead refer to terms such as protection of liberty and free speech, which is pretty much exactly how I'd write it. And Zia Youssef, a senior ally of Farage, said, "It will have nothing in it to help activist judges to stop flights taking off. It will prioritise the rights of British citizens over foreign ones. We are not going to flinch. We are not going to be intimidated. We are going to deliver for the British people. It's the only way to restore this country, to stop the invasion from happening." Based. This is the sort of thing I have been pretty much begging for the entire time I've been on YouTube. Especially once you read into the whole Blairite revolution. How is this anything but a complete repudiation of it? How is this anything but a counter-revolution to the terrible 20 to 30 years we have had in Britain? For once it will feel like being born in this country means that you will take priority for the powers that be in this country. I've literally never lived in a country like that. It's going to be alien to me, and I am looking very much forward to it. And while Zia Yusuf has been brought up, he's been doing a bit of his own chudding out, which works a hell of a lot better than most other chudding out on Twitter, for the simple reason that Zia Yusuf is likely actually going to be in power one day, rather than everyone else who's going to be ankle-biting for the rest of their lives, and had criticisms of this headline saying the Times calls our plan two-tier on the basis that it would prioritise the rights of British citizens over foreign ones. Yes. Chad, yes. That is what we will do. Thank you, Mr. Yusuf. Very cool. He is a very proud Scotsman, and I do consider him a great asset to reform in the country at large, as many other people do. Anyway, the initial draft details, I suppose you can call them, of this particular plan are just excellent. It's an awful lot of things that I have wanted for some time, and frankly, I had barely any doubts that reform would not deliver. In fact, I think I was quite pragmatic in my expectations. I thought that they would moderate a lot more than they did, but they haven't, and I'm very happy to see that. I've tempered my expectations with reform to say they will do what they need to do to win elections, and the fact they are going even more right than I've been expecting does show that they actually do think the centre ground, especially on immigration, is effectively way to the right, that anyone in the Times, in the Guardian, in most places in the mainstream media, thought they have been for the past year or so as well. I cannot wait for the details. My Tuesday is going to be spent doing decorating and obviously listening to the inevitable reform live stream, where they will be obviously giving us the details of this grand plan. While in the past you've had UKIP, BNP, other right-wing parties make all these promises without absolutely any chance of actually getting into office to actually enact it, with reform it's the exact opposite. People are almost expecting this plan to become reality. And in fact, you'll probably see Labour try and steal some of it and implement it themselves before reform get into power. And that is a way to reduce the damage that the clown decade is doing to the country, so that's good to see as well. Anyway, that is everything I had for you for today. If you enjoy what I do, please subscribe, leave a comment, and of course, like the video as well. Great ways to help out the channel. You can also become a member or leave super chats or super thanks. Also, great and direct ways to help out the channel. As for shilling, there are no streams this week. I am off from work, so I'm also off from streams. However, I'm going to be making videos as and when I can. I hope to make at least 2 more this week, but we'll see. It will probably be more rather than less. Right, with that, that is everything I had for you for today. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.